All right. Amy, can you hear me?
I can hear you, and
All
I
right.
unmuted myself.
Okay, got it. Yeah. So, yeah, my name is Gil Robs, who don't know yet, and I'm a race director for 3 local ultras. CandleLight 12 hours, Monday Ducks 12 hours, and CanLake Ultras. All the ultras are hosted by Greater Rochester Track Club, and today's interview is with Amy Mower, and this interview is part of the new initiative by the GRTC to have a Zoom meetings, Zoom interviews with the notable runners who are either from Rochester or participate in Rochester races. Um, and I mean, it used to be tradition before Can Lakes that you would have a guest speakers, and but now with busy life, sometimes it's easier right now. This we thought maybe just utilize the new technology and just we don't have to be present physically in the same room. We can have interviews remotely. So, having said that, so like I said, today's interview is with Ultra Marathoner Amy Mower, and Amy has a Western New York connection. Her first, I have said this before, Amy had her first ultra was 2015 CanLake Ultras, where she finished a 50 miler with 9 hours 35 minutes. Then, almost a couple years later, she participated at the second year at the CanLake 12 hours, and that was her first win. Since when I counted, she won 12 more ultras, at least if I missed the one or not, and 2 of them overall, which means not just the female category but male category as well. Those 2 overall wins were 2019 3 days at the fair, 48-hour ones with 222 miles, and just before pandemic hit was 2020 Jackpot Ultra running festival 48 hours interview. So having said that, let's just turn to Amy and let's learn more about her. So Amy, what can you tell about your upbringing? How did you start running ultras? How to get into running?
Sure. So I actually, as a child, I hated running. I couldn't stand it. It hurt. Um, I was a bookworm. I liked to watch TV, eat junk food, and move as little as possible. My parents tried to raise me right, and on Sundays they would sometimes have these family outings, like biking along the Bronx River Parkway because they would close the parkway down. But I just remember complaining all the time when we were doing anything that involved a lot of physical effort. Um, my first foray into running was actually I was on the track team in high school, and so the first couple of days of track they actually they do these tryouts. If anybody else has been on track, they have you run the different distances to see what you're good at. And so there are 2 types of people that they put in the quarter-mile race. And one of them are people who do them really well, and the other is people who can't do anything else. So I fell into that second category, and they stuck me in the quarter-mile, which is probably the hardest, or at least at the time, it was the hardest race in high school track because it was the longest distance that you actually had to sprint. At that point in time, half miles were, paced distances, so you could put just a little bit lower effort into it. So really, if you were running the quarter-mile right, you were pretty close to vomit at the end. And I started out just as a horrible quarter miler, and I finished as, I would say, maybe a little bit above mediocre. So it was a huge improvement. And one of the things I learned was how to basically push my limits and start and just work really hard at something, even if I wasn't good at it. And get better. And I certainly was by no means the best quarter miler on the team when I finished, but it was this great life lesson. But in terms of my background, I actually picked up drinking pretty early. And so I was a heavy drinker at the end of high school. I was a 2-pack a day smoker for a while. And both of those things continued into my early 20s. I actually stopped drinking at age 22, but I continued smoking until my mid 30s. And when I quit smoking, I felt like I had to do something to avoid gaining a lot of weight. So I made a commitment to myself that I would exercise 3 days in a row, and then I would take a day of rest, and then I'd exercise for 3 days. And basically, the 3 days were each a half an hour a day. So that was my foray into to basically intentional exercise, and I was probably 30 something when that happened. And a couple of years after doing that with some regularity, I did my first road race. Actually, I did some races around Cooperstown because I was in Cooperstown for about 20 years. And they had this race called the Coop Loop, which was a 5K. Not my distance, but they had great t-shirts. So I would sign up for the Coop Loop every year just to get these great cotton t-shirts. Did my first distance race. It was the Army 10 miler. When I guess it was probably 2015, 2014. No, it was before then, probably 2008. That was a 10 mile race. And I was so exhilarated by the training for that. I mean, one of the things I learned for training for a 10-mile race, which was just an unfathomable distance to me when I started it. But basically, I did that thing where every week you run a little bit further for your long run. So my long run is 4 miles, then it's 5 miles, then it's 6 miles, which was huge, 7 miles. And there's like this realization of, to run longer, all you have to do is run longer. Which is huge, but like it all of a sudden became a doable thing. And then after the 10 miler, I liked it so much, I jumped into marathons and did that. I basically used the Galloway method for years. So I think I did my first 8 marathons with a run walk. And it wasn't until I was training for my first Ironman triathlon that I actually ran a whole marathon. So, that was sort of my introduction into, it was sort of a slow, gradual introduction into fitness, really as an adult, because as a kid, I didn't like it at all.
All right. What's scary about this one is what you're saying is like the new world record holder in 12 hours on man's side, and I can't remember his last name. He had similar background. He was a heavy smoker and heavy drinker. Now he's world record holder in 12 hours. So
there's a lot of us.
Not the best way how to get in the sport, but I guess that's not the unique story
it's
then.
Not.
So what was prompted you to get to the CanLake 50s, and how did you start training for that one? And what was the first time you heard about ultrasound?
Yeah, so I mean, it wasn't that long before my first CanLakes that I started thinking about ultras. I had done an Ironman triathlon, and I was on a team that raised money for charity. And I had gone to visit my friend Katie in Texas, and she said, "Hey, Amy, watch this movie that we have. It's called Desert Runners. I thought of you when I saw it." And it was basically about it was a documentary about these 4 runners who had done the Grand Slam of the desert runs, which were staged races. They were each like 250 miles over 5 days. And they were in the 4 hardest deserts of the world, the hottest, the driest, the coldest, and I don't remember what the other one was. And I'm watching this movie about these ultra runners, and I'm like, no way, those people are crazy. Like, I am not doing that. And then on the plane heading back from Texas, I signed up for CanLakes. And the reason I picked CanLakes, I actually knew somebody who had run it. It was somebody I'd run into in the Cooperstown Marathon. And I knew that he had run a 50 miler in upstate New York. So I texted him and said, "What was that race that you signed up for?" And he told me about it. And within 10 minutes, I signed up. And that was about, so I had probably 4 months to go from marathon distance to 50 miles. And I used a training plan in Runner's World. And it was basically, it probably topped out at 75 miles a week. It was running 5 days a week, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So it was a 9, a 5, a 9. Mondays and Fridays were rest days, and then Saturday and Sunday were back to back. So the first back to back was like a 20 followed by a 12. And that was a huge revelation for me too, because in my entire life, always, if I had run 20 miles, then you could be damn sure that the next day was going to be a day off. I mean, it would never occur to me to run after a 20-mile run. So just that first back to back where I did 12 miles the day after I did a 20, and finding out that I could do that was huge. But it was a training plan that worked really well. I mean, I think it topped out at a 23 on a Saturday and then a 28 on a Sunday or something like that.
When you lined up at the CanLake start, so were you nervous or what was going through your head?
I was terrified. I mean, I hate pre-race. I always hate pre-race. And I hate it for a couple days. Actually, my daughter, who's cooking in the kitchen right now, she was my crew for CanLakes. And we had, so on the way up to CanLakes, I was doing this nervous eating thing. I had fried pickles, bad pre-race food, and nachos. But yeah, I was terrified. And I was sort of asking around. I'm like, has anybody ever done this before? And people were just giving me these scornful looks like, yeah. I'm like, okay. And I just felt much better as soon as we started moving, because at least I was on familiar ground then.
So talk through us your first ultra, because I mean, I think I like to talk about my ultra finish, which are not as many as you have, but I still I have the most stories from my first ultra. What I learned, what I felt, all the
Yeah.
ups and downs. Those are most were happened in my first ultra.
Well, Gil, it's a freaking hilly one. So there's that. I love road. And so one of the things I loved about CanLakes was that it was road. It was rolling hills, which is probably one of my favorite surfaces to run on. I like the variety of the hills. I like the predictability of concrete. Like me and trails do not get along. I fall on roots. I fall on rocks. I hurt myself. So I really prefer road. But CanLakes is great because it has the views and it has the lake and it has the change in terrain and the houses. So there's so much eye candy. I would say the first 10 miles were just sort of easing into the race and I was really careful to not go out too fast, which is easy for me because I'm not fast. And just to kind of keep a steady pace. And I think I actually ran the whole thing. I saw a lot, except for maybe Bopple and like the two horrible hills. What's the first one? The first one's Bopple, right? And then there's one at mile 35, and I don't remember the name of that hill. But yeah, I did not run Bopple, and I didn't run, all the way up. Yeah, the other one. But by and large, I ran pretty much the other hills where a lot of people were walking, and what seems to work well for me is I run at a pace that I try and make my effort on the hills equal to my effort on the flats, which could mean I'm running, a 14-minute mile, but it's still a running pace. And one of the things that does for me is as I get to the top where the grade starts to level off, I actually almost get this surge of energy, and then I feel great on the downhills. I remember that first race was trashing my quads, and basically the downs were much harder than the ups. And I remember seeing, as we were starting to get to the end and seeing some of the downs, just being dismayed that I had to do more down because it hurt so much and I couldn't really take advantage of it because I wasn't a strong downhill runner then. Um, I remember feeling like when I got to mile, well, so one of the cool things is my daughter was crewing me and she was driving my car, which was this teeny little orange Prius. And she's a teeny little blonde girl. And so I would get to the first aid station and she'd be there with stuff that I needed. And, as I'm driving away, she's, riding away in the orange Prius and beeping. And that was the coolest thing. Um, I remember at one or a aid station, she wasn't quite expecting me and she had to run out and she's like, "You passed the pink hat guy. Like, I didn't know that you were coming." Because, it was always be, I think it's Gary with a pink cowboy hat was ahead of me for a while. So she knew that whenever Gary came into an aid station, I'd be, right behind him. And I guess at some point I passed him. So that threw her off. And it was somewhere around, well, mile 35. I was pretty sure that I was like, I'm going to finish this thing. At that point in time, the longest run I had ever done was 30 miles. And so anything past 30 was new territory, and 35, I was like, yeah, I'm going up a hill. I finished the second biggest hill of the race, and I only have 15 miles in front of me, and if I need to walk it in, I can walk it in. And I remember mile 42, I passed this guy who just looked like he was a herding puppy. And he's looking at me and he's like, "How are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm doing great." Because, basically at that point in time, I had my Tuesday morning run in front of me and I still had, gas in the tank. Um, so I would just say, like, I finished the race and my muscles weren't trained for distance at that point in time the way they are right now. So they just locked up right after the race. And I needed help stepping down from a curb that was this high. So I was crippled, but I finished the race and I was so excited about it. I was hooked.
Whenever I run races, I think even I know it's in the bag, but I don't celebrate till I see the finish line.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Literally like 100 meters from me, about 100 yards. That's the only time when I truly believe I'm finished. So is this something similar to you as well? So
Yeah, I mean, I think at 35 and 42, I was pretty sure that I was going to finish, but by no means do I count it as a sure thing until, there it is.
the interesting comment that you made about the effort running hills and flats using the same effort. I remember years ago I was talking to one of my colleagues who was a bike rider, and he explained that bike gears are the same way. When bike riders do,
Right.
they basically do the same effort. They just change gears. They don't go faster or slower. Don't do effort. So that's interesting. That's tidbit. So anyway, so what was your thoughts about doing Altus before CanLakes, and what were your thoughts about doing more Altus after doing CanLakes, and how long were recovery period when you sign up for the next Ultra, and talk through that process.
So yeah, before I did Can Lakes, it sort of seemed like an impossible distance. I just didn't think anybody could run 50 miles. And after Can Lakes, I'm like, when can I sign up for 100? And I signed up for Beast of Burden. So actually, it wasn't right after Can Lakes. So after Can Lakes, I did some trail, a little bit of trail stuff. I did Mendon Ponds, and I did the mini beast. I did the 25 miler that January, and then I went down and I did the Cowtown 50K. So I did some shorter distances after Can Lakes, but then signed up for my first 100 for the Beast of Burden summer. So I guess my first 100 was about 10 or 11 months after Can Lakes.
All right. So that's the first time we saw you at CandleLight, when you were actually using CandleLight as a
Oh,
training
that's
for
right. That's
night
right.
training.
Yeah. It was 3 weeks before. So the CandleLight 12 hour, the first time was my last long training run before my first 100. And I rode up there with Tim Hardy and Pat McHenry and Alan Barnes. Yeah.
I mean, I think you were leading that race for a while, but then you just did a hard stop at 40 miles, and
35. I actually I stopped at 35 because my last long run was supposed to be 35, and then I volunteered for 3 hours,
ah,
and then I was like, oh, I can just go walk and get a few more miles. So I got in 5 more. Yeah, walking.
all right. So then you did your Beast of Burden, get your 100 miles in. Then you come back to 2017 CandleLight, and that was like I mean, that was your first win, and it's like the question. Talk through that. Talk through that race, how it was feeling for that, and how you trained for that. And I'm curious, did you have a confidence that you could win a race, or when did you? What's your feeling? What's your
So
mindset?
So here's the thing, like when I did that first CandleLight 12 hour, you said I was in the lead, but I didn't know that when I stopped. And after the race, you had texted me and you said, if you had stayed in the race, you would have won. And I'm like, damn it. Like I didn't know that. And I was so careful then because ultras were still too new. And I was really, like all the newbies you see on the list. And, they're like, oh, I have this race, but I don't want to, I'm afraid of running too much beforehand. And that's sort of where I was. I didn't know myself and my limits well enough to know, how I would handle running really long. So I was just being cautious. Whereas now I would totally have run the whole race 3 weeks before 100. I mean, I've run 100 before 100. Um, so anyway, you saying that actually sort of prepped me for how I went into my second CandleLight 12 hour because I went into it to win. I mean, when you said I could have won it, I went into the second CandleLight thinking maybe I could win it. So that was my hope going into it. And my training actually just is it's pretty much just run lots of slow easy miles and every once in a while throw in some fast stuff, but most of my running is, I mean, when I say most, I mean really most of my running is at whatever pace brings me joy for the day.
That's a good approach.
So
I I have to again like quote something I quote about learned about mountain climbers. I read and which could apply to any sport. The best mountain climber is the one who has the most fun. So if you don't have fun, why do it?
yeah.
So during that race, I mean, now we know that you came in more to win. When how when during the race, when did you know that that's gonna happen?
I didn't know that it was going to happen, but it was like it was like hour 6 or hour 7. I was passing the timing tent and I said, you know, Gil, how many women are in front of me? Do you know? And you said, yeah, I know. And I said, how many? And you said, none. I'm like, oh, cool. So all I got to do is just keep up what I'm doing.
So how was the feeling when you crossed the finish line as a winner for the first time?
It was awesome. I mean, I remember you reposted the picture, and that kind of brings back memories. But I actually still had some energy in the tank, so I think I actually ran fast across the finish line, which certainly doesn't always happen in an ultra. But I was so excited to be winning that. I mean, it just I had been training a lot. I felt like I was getting stronger and kind of knew what I was doing at that point. And I worked hard for it, but I just loved that race. So it was amazing winning a race that also is one of the races that I think is really a joy race. I mean, you see all the twinkling lights. There's this mysteriousness of the nighttime and the mist and the cat by the lake and all of those things.
So seems after that win, you seem to make the winning of the ultras like a habit. Like every other month, there's another win. Every other month, there's another win. All that stuff. So I'm like I said, like counted about 12 wins since then, 2 overall wins. Um, so from all the ultras you have done so far, and you have done plenty, a lot actually, as well. So, which is your favorite and why?
I love the upstate New York races. So your races are among the top group. But if I had to pick my all-time favorite race, I would say the Greater New York 100. It starts and ends in Times Square, and it's essentially a 100-mile journey on foot around New York City. So it's that race, I'm just in the happiest place I've ever been in, prancing around New York City and stopping at convenience stores and getting slushies and seeing everything on foot. It truly feels like you're packing, weeks worth of sightseeing into 24 hours.
So, from all the race, from all the racing you have done, what was the most interesting racing experience you have had, or you can list few of them. It shouldn't be just one or two.
Interesting racing experiences. I can tell you it was really interesting. So Laz, who does the Vol State race, he's also the RD for a race called ARFTA, a race for the ages, which is an age handicapped race. So basically, the oldest runner starts first. So if you're 85 years old, which I think was the oldest runner the first year I ran, you have 85 hours to win, and each hour, whoever is that age, so it ends on Monday at noon, Labor Day at noon. And basically it starts as many hours before then as the oldest runner is years old. So each hour there are new runners starting. So it's sort of a timed race, but it's age handicapped. Patricia. Sorry. So anyway, it's age handicapped, and Laz lost his caterer for this race a couple weeks prior to the race. So he lined up Cracker Barrel to cater the race. And trying to run an ultra after a heavy Cracker Barrel meal, which we were having 3 times a day plus a midnight snack, I would say that's got to rank as one of the more interesting ultra experiences that I've had.
Cool. So I could list a bunch of ultras which I mean, I like all ultras, but I had some bad experiences, and it's I wonder if you have had, from all ultras, if you had experience what you particularly did not like.
Yeah, I mean, so I would say the worst the worst experience I had, it's my daughter's cat. The worst experience I had was across the years. It was a 48-hour race. It wasn't this past December, but it was the year before that. And one of the problems with getting to the point where on occasion I win a race is it's changed my attitude towards races in a way that I don't necessarily find admirable, and I'm working to get back to where I used to be. But it got to the point where I would go into the race really wanting to win, and then if during the early parts I was uncomfortable and starting to feel like the goal wasn't in sight, it would put me in a really bad mental spot. And that happened at this 48-hour race. I had gone into it when I initially went into the race, and you look at the piece of paper, I was probably the top seed woman in the race. And then a couple weeks before the race, Camille Herron jumps into the race, and I'm like, all right. And she jumps into the race wanting to set a 6-day world record, or not a 6-day, a 48-hour world record. And I'm like, okay, that's great. There's my race. And I really wish I could say that didn't affect my mental state at all, but it threw it down the toilet. Like knowing that I was racing Camille and that there was no chance that I could win this race. And which actually wasn't entirely true. I mean, my crew were like, you know what, she could drop. She drops, regularly, depending, because she runs so fast. She either runs brilliantly or sometimes she, has injuries and drops out. So anyway, I started this race, and I had a great first 50 miles, but then I don't know what happened. It was cold out. I was getting kind of hypothermic. I was feeling nauseous. I just wasn't feeling great. And I went into the warming tent because the temperature had just plummeted and I was not comfortable. I went into the warming tent, and all of a sudden, mentally, the race was done. I was just done. And I just sat there, and my husband at the time was my crew, and I texted him and I'm like, yeah, I'm sitting down and I think I'm done. He's like, what do you mean you're done? I'm like, no, I'm done. He's like, no, you're not done. You need to get out there and you need to get back on the track and you need to come, just get out and come around. And I'm like, no. um and so I was sitting there, and then the race director came in, and she's just like, well, do you have any other goals? Because I'm like, I've sat here for half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour. My goal is slipping by. And the thing about a multi-day is I could have just gotten back out there and it would have been fine. It would have been an hour lost, but I didn't have that mindset. And finally after about an hour and a half, um I got back out there, and this was after the race director had said, "Well, you know what? If you really want to drop out, you can at least come back tomorrow and get your 100-mile buckle, and so you can go and you can warm up tonight, and you don't have to keep running tonight. It's a 48-hour race, and you can just come back tomorrow and do some more miles." I'm like, okay, that I can get my hand around. I'll just stick it out for 100. And I went back and I sat in my husband's car, and he's like, get out there. And I'm like, no, I don't want to be out there. I want to be done. Take me to a restaurant. And he was so mad at me. But we ended up, going to a restaurant, and I just told people I was done. And I did end up getting 3 hours of sleep and then coming back and getting my 100, but then I left. I walked off the course. And on the plane back, it was not a good feeling. I never left a race leaving so much on the table, and I was used to coming back, sometimes with a trophy, but at least knowing that I had done my best. And this one, I quit. And I was like, this is not good. I don't like this feeling at all. This is not a good post ultra feeling. So before the plane took off the ground, the one nice thing about across the years is they had all of these different events, and they actually had their inaugural 100-mile race a week after this one, because they had this 10-day event going on. So I signed up for the 100-mile, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going back. I have to go back to that same place, and I have to get some redemption, because I don't like what I just did. And so I did. I went back the next week, and I I got my 100 miles. I got redemption, and I felt much better. But I would say that was my low.
I mean, clearly you are strive more at timed races, and one of the perks of the timed races is that you can set up your personal aid station. Plus, your crew is you could see the crew more often than regular races. So what's your preparation process for the personal aid station? What do you set up, and what are your interactions with the crew?
It starts. So I'm a pretty low maintenance runner. I see, and Brian, I see your chat, so I'll answer that in just a second too. Um, it sort of depends on whether it's a hot weather race or cold weather race. Basically, if it is a cold weather race, I have almost no personal aid station stuff. I mean, what I basically need is clothes to change into, either warmer or colder. I need, hand warmers, but I don't need anything for nutrition, because in cold weather, I can pretty much stomach anything that the aid station has. In hot weather, I have learned that I need a cooler full of liquid nutrition. And so what has worked, because I can't keep anything down on a hot race, I just get nauseous, and solid food doesn't work at all. I mean, maybe I can do a little fruit. So for hot races, I'll get protein shakes like Ensure. I will get seltzer with lemon and like a little bit of lemon juice, Diet Coke, Diet Gin. For some reason I like diet better than sugar, so I'll get my sugar some other way, but I'll drink Diet Coke and Diet Ginger Ale. Go down pretty easily when nothing else does. And I would say the absolute best thing that a crew could do for me during a hot multi-day race is to go out and get me a slushie or a milkshake. I'll drink those yogurt kefirs. I mean, my last race, actually, I did a race in Paso Robles, which was, it was a 100-mile race, but it was a looped race. So we had our own aid stations. And I brought some of those flavored kefir, the yogurt drinks, and those worked well for me for a while too. So that's my nutrition, and that's my personal aid station. And let me just snag Brian's question, which is, some of the struggles that I run into in multi-day races is, I just did something and lost. Where is everybody? Somehow I have just lost
You're still here.
everybody's pictures. Where is everybody?
We can see you.
You can see me, but I can't see you. It's a little disconcerting. All right. So I'll just look at Gilder. There it is. I hit minimize window. Okay. So struggles in multi-day. I think struggles in multi-day are, it's 90% mental and 10% physical most of the time. My last multi-day, not my last multi-day, but my last 6-day race though, my biggest struggle was actually physical. I was hoping, I went in with the goal of setting the American women's record. I was on track for it, through day 2. And somewhere in day 3, I developed the lean, and that had never happened to me before. So I actually didn't know it from feeling. I'm looking as I'm running around and I see my shadow, and my shadow is crooked. I'm like, I asked some runner, I was like, am I leaning? And they're like, yeah, you have been for a while. And it just got worse and worse. And so by day 4, I actually had to have a physical therapist do some, just an hour's worth of massage just to be able to get back out there. And I stayed in for the whole 6 days, but the last 2.5, they were so painful. And I was leaning, like I literally had to push my hand into my hip to keep straight enough to keep walking around. And so instead of, my goal had been somewhere from 490 to 500. And, then it looked like maybe 400 was possible. And at the end, I had to stop about, 7 or 8 hours before the race was over, because in addition to the lean, because of trying to compensate so much, I got this nasty tendonitis on my Achilles, and I just couldn't walk anymore. So that, I would say, was the only time in a multi-day race where the struggles were more physical than mental. But by and large, it's, your head. It's saying, I don't want to be here, or you go into dark places overnight because you're just stripped so raw that you are, having mental struggles.
We have 6 minutes left in this interview, so before we get to more technical questions, so there's just a question that I ask is like, what would 20-year-old Amy think about herself that all suddenly gets hate to do this to you, but that almost 50-year-old Amy is winning races left and right and becoming this outer superstar?
20-year-old Amy wouldn't have recognized 50-year-old Amy. 20-year-old Amy was a train wreck. I mean, it would have been, I don't know what 20-year-old Amy would have thought. Maybe I would have been, I kind of got my act together around 22, 23, but I just don't think 20-year-old Amy would have believed it.
30-year-old?
What's that?
How about 30-year-old Amy?
30-year-old Amy was already starting to think maybe Amy could do some good things. I mean, if I had known, I would have liked to have gotten into it a little bit earlier. But the journey I had was the journey I had. you know, I think I would have been happy at least to know that that as I was you know, approaching 50 and in my 50s, I'd actually be in a healthier place than I had been in for much of my adult life.
So are you morning runner or evening runner when you
I'm a
train?
morning runner. I'm actually a recovering morning runner in that for a while, in order to get the mileage that I wanted, I was getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to get in 18 miles before work. I stopped that. So now I'm getting up at 4. And, you know, I'm content with 12 to 15 most days, and I'm taking more rest days, and that's been better.
Brian is asking, have you had any hallucinations during any of your longer races?
No, I have not. Yeah, there it is. I have not had hallucinations during my longer races. Everybody talks about hallucinations. I mean, I almost fell asleep in a porta potty once, but I haven't hallucinated. And I see Michelle saying, what are your strategies for addressing the mental struggles during the race? I would say trying to bring it back to the here and now, like mindfulness, because that actually happened to me on my first 48 hour was actually at ARFTA. And I was going into a really dark place at night. I was relatively recently divorced. I had moved to a new place. I had a new job, and I was sort of this new person that was running these long races. And so somewhere in the middle of the night, I was sleep deprived. I was, you know, just physically exhausted. And I had this almost dissociative episode that was sort of like a panic attack where I just didn't recognize this person who was running. It was really frightening. And Bill Schultz, who's a good friend of mine, was there, and he's like, all right. And I was also getting disheartened because I was slowing down. And he's like, okay, well, first of all, you know, 13-minute miles at this point in the race are perfectly fine. And second of all, just run to that post and then you can walk. I'm like, okay, I can do that. So he and I would run to the post and then we'd walk. And he's like, okay, just run to that post. And somehow just by setting these mini goals, it brought me back into the moment. It got my head back in the game, because instead of focusing on this big picture, surrealistic, dissociative stuff, I'm like, run to the pole. It's a concrete goal. And that's been huge. And I do that now too. Like if I'm in pain, or if I'm, you know, struggling with being too far in the future, saying, what happens if blah, 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 blah. I'm like, okay, let's just start counting, count to 20, get to that next, you know, set mini goals.
Very good. Technical question. How long you keep your running shoes? That's manufacturers recommend it's 500 miles, 3 to 500, but how long?
I don't even know if mine make it to 500. I mean, with my gait, I kind of shear off the side of the back of the heels of my shoes. I wear Hokas and Ultras. If they make it to 500, that's probably a lot. I probably only get to 350, 400 for a pair of shoes before I have to chuck them.
All
I
right.
don't actually track the mileage. I just chuck them when the heels get too bad.
Okay. Very good. All right. Well, that's all the time that we had for today. Thank you, Amy. This was interesting, and thanks for sharing your experiences. And guys, you
Bill,
can unmute and
Yeah.
yourselves and give the.
Thank you for having me, and I hope everybody has a great candlelight. I'm gonna miss that race.
Thank you so much, Amy.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks, Michelle.
Have a good one.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.